I-48F, remember the day I met Mark, 45M, like it was yesterday. I've spent 20 years working as a CPA, and my office is right in the heart of downtown. That day, I had been drowning in quarterly reports and desperately needed to escape the fluorescent lights and endless Excel sheets. That's how I found myself in this tiny dive cafe, the kind where the coffee tastes like it's been sitting since morning, but nobody cares because it's cheap and the Wi-Fi works. I was sitting there, glasses perched on my nose, trying to make sense of some discrepancies in my clients' accounts when the bell above the door chimed. The sound mixed with the scent of expensive cologne, a stark contrast to the cafe's perpetual aroma of stale coffee and yesterday's muffins. That's when Mark walked in. "Is this seat taken?" he asked, gesturing to the chair across from me. His voice was warm, with a slight southern drawl that reminded me of home. I looked up from my laptop, ready to give my usual polite but dismissive response, but something in his smile made me pause. He had kind eyes, the kind that crinkle at the corners when they smile. "Looks free to me," I replied, trying to sound casual while my heart did a little skip. Here's the thing about meeting someone at my age, you don't expect the butterflies anymore. After my first marriage crashed and burned, turns out my ex-husband had a thing for his 20-something secretary. How cliché, right? I had convinced myself that romance was a young person's game. I had my career, my book club, and my cat Mr. Whiskers. I was content, or at least that's what I told myself during those quiet Sunday mornings when the house felt a little too empty. But Mark was different. He asked about the work I was doing, and unlike most people who glaze over when I mention accounting, he seemed genuinely interested. "Numbers tell stories," he said, "and it seems like you're quite the storyteller." We ended up talking for hours. He was in real estate development, and we shared the same dry sense of humor about corporate life. When he finally asked for my number, it felt natural, like the next chapter in a story that was already writing itself. Our first date was at a little Italian restaurant where the owner still made pasta by hand. Mark ordered wine that was way too expensive and told me stories about growing up in Georgia. We discovered we both had an unhealthy obsession with terrible reality TV shows. The Bachelor is our guilty pleasure, and got into a heated debate about whether pineapple belongs on pizza. It absolutely does, and I'll die on that hill. The following weeks were a whirlwind of coffee dates, movie nights, and long walks in the park. Mark was thoughtful in ways that surprised me. He remembered how I liked my coffee, one sugar, splash of cream, brought soup when I caught a cold, and never complained when Mr. Whiskers claimed his lap as prime napping real estate. We talked about everything, our failed relationships, our dreams, our fears. He understood my dedication to my career, and I respected his ambition in real estate. 3 months in, he took me to meet his mother, Judith, 69F. That's when the first cracks started to appear in our perfect story. The moment I walked into their family home, a pristine colonial that screamed old money and older judgments, I could feel Judith sizing me up like a predator evaluating its prey. She was immaculately put together, pearls gleaming at her throat, not a silver hair out of place. "So you're the woman Mark can't stop talking about," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "A career woman, at your age, interesting." The way she said interesting made it sound like a diagnosis of a particularly unpleasant disease. Throughout dinner, she peppered me with questions that felt more like interrogation points. "Do you cook, dear?" "Sometimes." "Do you plan to keep working after marriage?" "Absolutely." "Don't you think it's a bit late for children?" That one stung. Mark seemed oblivious to the undertones, or maybe he was just used to his mother's behavior. He squeezed my hand under the table and smiled encouragingly, but I could feel the weight of Judith's disapproval settling around us like a heavy fog. As our relationship progressed, Judith's presence became an increasingly dark cloud on our horizon. She had opinions about everything: where we should live, closer to her, how we should furnish our home, more traditionally, how I should dress, more conservatively. When Mark proposed 6 months later, her first words weren't congratulations, but, "Well, I suppose we should discuss the prenup." The prenup negotiations were where things really got interesting. Judith brought in her family's lawyer, a stern-faced man who looked like he'd been practicing law since the Civil War. I brought my own attorney, a sharp woman who'd handled my first divorce and knew exactly how to protect my interests. Just a formality, Judith assured me with that same cold smile. Family tradition, you understand. But I understood what wasn't being said. She thought I was after Mark's money, their family name, their social status. What she didn't know was that I made more than Mark did, and I had my own family name I was quite proud of. Thank you very much. That's when I added my own clause to the prenup. If either party cheats, they pay $100,000. Mark looked shocked. Babe, I'd never cheat on you, he promised, his face earnest. But I'd heard those words before, hadn't I? From my first husband, right before I found him with his pants around his ankles in his office after hours. Judith's face turned an interesting shade of purple, but she couldn't object without making it obvious why she might be concerned. We got married in a small ceremony at a local botanical garden, despite Judith's protests about how family traditions called for something grander at their country club. Mark supported my desire for something intimate, though I could tell he was torn between making me happy and pleasing his mother. The first year was good, mostly. We bought a house, a modern place with lots of natural light that made Judith's nose wrinkle in disapproval. We fell into an easy rhythm of shared lives. Sunday brunches at our place, where I'd try out new recipes and Mark would pretend they were all delicious, even the time I seriously overcooked the frittata. Movie nights where we'd fall asleep on the couch, planning trips to Italy we knew we couldn't quite afford yet but dreamed about anyway. But Judith was always there, hovering at the edges of our happiness like a particularly persistent storm cloud. She'd drop by unannounced, typically when Mark was at work, to check on things. Her comments started small, almost innocent if you didn't know to look for the poison in them. Oh, is this how you organize the kitchen? Or, interesting choice of dinner for a working woman. Then they grew bolder. Mark looks tired. Are you making sure he's well taken care of? I tried to keep the peace for Mark's sake. When Judith criticized my cooking, I smiled and asked for her recipes. When she rearranged our furniture during one of her visits, I left it that way for a week before quietly putting everything back. When she made comments about my age and the lack of grandchildren, I swallowed my hurt and changed the subject. But 2 months ago, things started to change. It was subtle at first, the kind of changes that make you doubt your own instincts. Mark began taking calls from Robert from work, in other rooms. When I walked in during these calls, he'd quickly end them. His late nights at the office increased from occasional to regular occurrences. He changed his phone's password, though I'd never once tried to look at it. Small things, maybe, but my first marriage had taught me to trust my gut. The way he angled his phone screen away from me when texting. The new cologne he started wearing. The sudden interest in going to the gym. All tiny red flags that together started to form a pattern I recognized all too well. Then last week, I overheard something that made my blood run cold. I was supposed to be at a client meeting, but it had been cancelled last minute. I came home early and heard voices from Mark's home office, him and Judith. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but then I heard my name. Update 1-2 days after overhearing that conversation between Mark and Judith, I started paying closer attention to the details I'd been trying to ignore. The frequency of Robert from work calls had increased to almost daily, and Mark had started taking them in our backyard, pacing near the garden I'd planted last spring. Ironic how he chose the spot where I'd invested so much hope for our future together. Last night was particularly telling. Mark came home late again, around 10 p.m., carrying takeout from a restaurant we'd never been to. His excuse? Robert suggested this new place. The thing is, I'd driven past his office at 7 p.m., and his car wasn't in the parking lot. When I casually mentioned having been in that area, he quickly mumbled something about a client meeting at a coffee shop. The cologne situation has gotten more obvious too. Mark used to wear the same brand I'd given him for our first Christmas together. Now there's a new scent, something lighter, more floral. When I noticed the unfamiliar bottle in our bathroom, he claimed it was a sample from a department store. But I've seen him deliberately applying it before these late meetings. What really set off alarm bells was his sudden interest in our joint finances. Mark has always been relatively uninvolved with our money management, happy to let me handle things given my professional background. But last week, he started asking detailed questions about our accounts, especially about the automatic payments and transfer settings. He even suggested we simplify our banking by consolidating accounts. Something about his tone made my accountant's instincts tingle. The changes in his appearance have become more pronounced too. New shirts started appearing in his closet, styles I'd never seen him wear before. More fitted, more youthful. When I complimented one, he vaguely mentioned a workplace style update initiative. Funny how this initiative only seems to affect him and not any other colleagues I've met at company events. Judith's behavior has shifted as well. Her usual criticism of my housekeeping and cooking has been replaced by something more calculated. Now she makes comments about how young people dress these days, and how some women really know how to take care of themselves. Yesterday, she actually brought over anti-aging cream, saying, "I saw this and thought of you, dear." The final straw came this morning. I was sorting laundry when a receipt fell out of Mark's pants pocket. It was from a jewelry store, not the one where he bought my engagement ring, but a trendy boutique downtown. The purchase date was 3 days ago. Our anniversary isn't for months, and my birthday was last month. He's never been the type to buy random jewelry gifts. I've started documenting everything. Every late night, every mysterious call, every unexplained expense. The accountant in me knows the importance of a proper paper trail. I've also taken photos of all our financial documents and made copies of our prenuptial agreement. That $100,000 infidelity clause is starting to feel less like paranoia and more like foresight. I'm considering hiring a private investigator. The irony isn't lost on me, using my own money to potentially prove my husband is cheating with a younger woman. But I need to know. Not just for the prenup, but for my own sanity. I keep thinking about that conversation I overheard between him and Judith, wondering how long they've been plotting behind my back. At dinner tonight, Mark mentioned his mother's upcoming 70th birthday. "We should do something special," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Maybe that new French restaurant downtown?" The way he said it felt rehearsed, like a script he'd practiced. Little does he know, I'm already 2 steps ahead in this game they think they're so cleverly playing. I can't help but laugh at how history repeats itself, another husband, another younger woman, another betrayal. But this time, I'm not the same naive woman I was in my first marriage. This time, I'm armed with experience, evidence, and a legally binding contract. The question isn't whether Mark is cheating anymore. The question is, when do I make my move? If anyone has experience with reliable private investigators in the Boston area, I'd appreciate recommendations. I need someone discreet and thorough. In the meantime, I'll keep playing the role of the oblivious wife, pretending not to notice how he doesn't kiss me goodbye anymore, or how his Robert from work calls always seem to come at the same time every evening. Update 2: The private investigator's report arrived this morning in a plain manila envelope. Everything I suspected was laid out in high-resolution photos and detailed surveillance notes, but seeing the truth still knocked the wind out of me. The other woman isn't from his office, she's a yoga instructor named Rachel, 28F, who teaches at the gym Mark suddenly started frequenting 3 months ago. The photos show them at a small Italian bistro 2 towns over, holding hands across the table. There's a series from last Wednesday, the night he said he had a client dinner, showing them walking through a park, stopping to kiss under the streetlights. The PI even captured audio of them discussing their future together. Hearing Mark use the same sweet phrases he once used with me made my stomach turn. The timeline in the PI's report reveals their relationship started 2 months before Mark's sudden interest in the gym. This means when Judith was bringing me that anti-aging cream and making those snide comments about taking care of yourself, she was already in on it. She wasn't just being her usual critical self, she was actively participating in the deception. The most damning evidence came from their phone records. Robert from work is actually Rachel, Mark just changed her name in his contacts. They've been texting constantly, hundreds of messages a day, starting as early as 5 a.m. and often continuing until after midnight. Some days, these exchanges happened while he was lying next to me in bed. The PI also uncovered something unexpected: receipts for a small apartment rental in Back Bay, paid in cash. Mark's been maintaining a secret love nest, funded by the mysterious withdrawals I noticed in our joint account but chose to ignore. According to the building's security footage, they've been meeting there at least twice a week. Today, Judith called about her upcoming birthday celebration. Her voice dripped with false sweetness as she suggested Le Chateau, the most expensive French restaurant in the city. "Since you're so successful in your career," she said, emphasizing the word successful like it was a character flaw, "I thought you might want to treat the family to somewhere special." What she doesn't know is that I've already made a reservation there. I also have copies of every text between her and Mark discussing their plan to handle the situation after her birthday dinner. They think they're so clever, waiting until after I've paid for an expensive celebration to drop their bomb. The irony of them using my own money to fund their grand finale isn't lost on me. I've already started making preparations. I've moved my legally entitled portion of our assets to a new account and gathered all important documents in a safety deposit box. The prenup with its $100,000 infidelity clause is safely tucked away with the PI's report. The strangest part is how calm I feel. Maybe it's because I've been here before, or maybe it's because I've spent weeks preparing for this moment. Either way, there's something almost liberating about having all the pieces finally fall into place. Every time Mark kisses me goodbye, now, his lips stiff and distant, I think about how he has no idea what's coming. Tomorrow, I'm meeting with my lawyer to review the prenup and the evidence. The birthday dinner is in 3 days. Sometimes I catch my reflection in the mirror and barely recognize the woman staring back. She looks stronger somehow, more determined. This time, I won't be the one blindsided at dinner. This time, I'm writing the ending to this story. Has anyone else caught their spouse and mother-in-law conspiring together? I'd love to hear how you handled it. In the meantime, I'll be checking the restaurant's cancellation policy and making sure my credit card has a very specific spending limit set for that evening. Update 3, tonight was Judith's 70th birthday dinner at Le Chateau, and everything unfolded exactly as I predicted, well, almost. I arrived early to confirm the arrangements I'd made with the restaurant manager about the payment processing. Mark and Judith looked surprised when I selected the private dining room with its crystal chandeliers and premium wine list. "Nothing but the best for family," I said, watching their faces closely. The other guests, Mark's siblings and their spouses, arrived shortly after. Everyone was dressed to the nines, with Judith wearing what looked like a new designer dress. I ordered the most expensive wines, encouraged everyone to choose whatever they wanted from the menu, and kept the conversation flowing smoothly. The bill would eventually total just over $3,000. Throughout dinner, I noticed Mark and Judith exchanging glances. She kept checking her phone, and he seemed increasingly agitated. I pretended not to notice, instead sharing stories about our early dating days, watching him squirm with each memory I recounted. After the dessert plates were cleared, I excused myself to powder my nose. In reality, I stepped out to confirm with the manager that my credit card would be declined as planned. When I returned, Mark was already standing, his expression set in what I recognized as his serious business face. "I think it's time we made an announcement," he said, looking everywhere but at me. "This marriage isn't working anymore. I want a divorce." The table fell silent. His siblings looked uncomfortable, but not surprised. Clearly, they'd been briefed beforehand. Judith didn't even try to hide her satisfaction. "Well, since that's out in the open," she said, her voice dripping with barely concealed triumph, "I think it's best you leave now, dear. We're celebrating family tonight, and you're no longer part of it." I stood up calmly, gathered my purse, and walked out without a word. Behind me, I could hear the waiter approaching with the bill. I waited in my car, counting down the minutes until my phone started buzzing with increasingly panicked messages. The first call came from Mark. "What do you mean the card was declined?" Then Judith, "This is unacceptable. You need to fix this immediately." I let them all go to voicemail, each message more desperate than the last. The restaurant manager, following my earlier instructions, insisted on payment before anyone could leave. I heard from one of the waitstaff that Judith's face turned an impressive shade of red when she realized none of her cards were working either. I'd made sure to call her bank with concerns about suspicious activity earlier that day. The final touch? I'd tipped the staff generously in advance to film any disturbance that might occur, citing concerns about potential harassment. So now I have wonderful footage of Judith throwing a tantrum while Mark desperately calls everyone he knows to help cover the bill. As I write this, I'm sitting in my new apartment, sipping the same expensive wine they're drinking at Le Chateau, listening to the increasingly frantic voicemails. Tomorrow, I'll have my lawyer deliver the divorce papers along with the evidence of Mark's infidelity. That $100,000 clause in our prenup is about to become very, very relevant. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just served cold, it's served with a side of karma and a hefty bill. Update 4, the aftermath of Judith's birthday dinner has been nothing short of spectacular. I returned to our house this morning, timing my arrival perfectly when I knew both Mark and Judith would be there. As expected, they were in the kitchen, looking haggard from what I assume was a sleepless night dealing with the restaurant fiasco. I walked in calmly, placed my laptop on the kitchen counter, and opened a folder containing the PI's report, photos, and bank statements. "Let's talk about Rachel from the yoga studio," I said, watching the color drain from Mark's face. Or should I say Robert from work? Judith immediately tried to take control of the situation. "How dare you embarrass us like that last night? Do you know how long it took us to sort out that bill? The manager threatened to call the police." Her voice had that familiar condescending tone, but there was an edge of panic now. I pulled out the prenuptial agreement and laid it next to the evidence. Section 7.3, the infidelity clause. $100,000 payable immediately upon proof of cheating. Shall we go through the proof, or should I just have my lawyer contact yours? Mark started stammering about misunderstandings and how things weren't what they seemed. But when I played the audio recording of him and Rachel discussing their future plans in their secret Back Bay apartment, he fell silent. Judith's face turned that same interesting shade of red I'd heard about from the restaurant. "You can't prove anything," Judith snapped, but her voice wavered. That's when I pulled out the text messages between her and Mark, planning how to handle me after her birthday dinner. "It's interesting how detailed you both were in your plotting. Almost as if you wanted to leave a paper trail." The shift in their demeanor was remarkable. Judith's imperious attitude crumbled as she realized how thoroughly I documented everything. Mark kept opening and closing his mouth like a fish out of water, especially when I mentioned Rachel's detailed statement to the PI about their relationship timeline. "You have until the end of the week to transfer the money," I said, gathering my evidence back into the folder. "Otherwise, these photos of your secret apartment meetings go to everyone in your real estate firm. I'm sure your clients would be fascinated by how you handle property viewings." Judith tried one last time to salvage the situation. "You vindictive little..." She started, but Mark cut her off. He knew he was caught. "I'll get the money," he said quietly, not meeting my eyes. As I turned to leave, Judith called out, "You planned this all along, didn't you? The restaurant, the evidence, everything?" I couldn't help but smile. "No, Judith. You planned this. I just made sure you paid for it, literally. I'm back in my new apartment now. My lawyer just confirmed that Mark is arranging to borrow the money from his parents. Apparently, the publicity of a messy divorce would be worse for his business than paying the penalty. Judith is furious about having to help him with the payment, which feels like an extra layer of justice. The irony isn't lost on me that they're scrambling to borrow money while I'm sitting here with printouts of Rachel's social media posts, all those loving messages she's been sending Mark, completely unaware that she was just another player in his game. I wonder if she knows he's borrowing money from mommy to pay off his soon-to-be ex-wife. I've already started the divorce proceedings. My lawyer assures me it will be quick and clean, especially with all the evidence we have. Sometimes I catch myself feeling almost grateful to Judith. If she hadn't been so obvious in her plotting, I might not have been prepared enough to catch them. Update 5, it's been 3 months since the restaurant showdown, and my life has transformed in ways I never expected. I've moved into a charming craftsman-style house in a quiet neighborhood across town. It's smaller than our old place, but it has a garden that gets perfect morning light. I've already started growing tomatoes and herbs, though I'm in a constant battle with the local squirrels over my vegetables. The divorce was finalized last week. Mark didn't even contest it after paying the infidelity clause. The look on his face when he handed over the cashier's check for $100,000 was priceless. Judith had to refinance her house to help him pay it, which might explain why she's been unusually quiet lately. I ran into Rachel at Whole Foods last month. She was wearing the rose gold necklace Mark had bought her, but her eyes had that same disillusioned look I remember seeing in my own mirror years ago. Through the grapevine, I heard she discovered Mark had been seeing another woman from his gym. Apparently, old habits die hard. Work has been a refreshing focus. I've taken on several new clients who specifically requested me after hearing about how I handled the financial aspects of my divorce. There's something satisfying about helping other women protect their assets and plan for unexpected life changes. My new home has become a sanctuary. No more surprise visits from Judith, no more passive-aggressive comments about my housekeeping or cooking. I've started taking cooking classes, not because anyone expects it of me, but because I want to. Last week, I actually managed to make a soufflé that didn't collapse. The funniest part? Mark and Judith are barely speaking now. It seems their little conspiracy backfired spectacularly. She blames him for having to refinance her house, and he resents her for pushing him to maintain their family image at all costs. My former sister-in-law told me Judith tried to set Mark up with her tennis instructor's daughter, but it ended in disaster when the girl called him emotionally stunted and overly dependent on his mother. I've started dating again, casually. Nothing serious, just coffee meetings with interesting men who can hold a conversation about something other than their mother's opinions. It's liberating to realize I don't need to rush into another relationship to feel complete. The money from the infidelity clause went straight into renovating my new home's kitchen and creating a beautiful garden space. Every morning, I have my coffee on the back patio, watching the sunrise and planning my day. Sometimes I laugh thinking about how Judith's perfect family plan imploded so spectacularly. Yesterday, I received an invitation to Mark's cousin's wedding. Obviously, it was sent before they updated their mailing list, but I couldn't help but smile imagining Judith's reaction if I actually showed up. Instead, I used the expensive cardstock to write down my favorite recipe for homemade marinara sauce. Life feels lighter now. I've joined a yoga studio, a different one from Rachel's, of course, and started meditation. My cat, Mr. Whiskers, approved of the move by claiming the sunniest windowsill in the new house as his personal domain. Sometimes I wonder if Mark and Judith learned anything from this experience. Last I heard, she's still trying to control his dating life, and he's still letting her. But that's not my story anymore. My story is about morning coffee in my garden, successful client meetings, trying new recipes just because I want to, and planning a solo trip to Italy, the one Mark and I always talked about but never took. The other day, someone asked if I regret how everything ended. I thought about it while watering my tomato plants and realized I don't. Some endings are actually beginnings in disguise. Mine just happened to come with a $100,000 starter fund and the priceless lesson that the best revenge isn't just about getting even, it's about getting free. Thanks everyone for your support and advice throughout this journey. Your comments helped me stay strong and focused when I needed it most. Here's to new beginnings.